Welcome into episode 211 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridgette and Scott McLaughlin. Originally, Bridgette and Scott, we were scheduled to record tomorrow on Wednesday. However, on Tuesday, Patrice Bergeron, after almost 20 full calendar years since his NHL debut in October of 2003, he has officially announced his retirement. And there are a million things we have to discuss. But Bridgette and Scott, your initial reactions when you heard the news, were you surprised? I mean, last podcast we were discussing the Bruins next season, going under the assumption that Bergeron were to return. Of course, still listen, but throw that out the window. So there's definitely a lot to talk about regarding next season and thereafter replacing Bergeron. But first and foremost, there's the celebration of one of the greatest Bruins to ever lace him up, and just that officially coming to an end.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it's not surprising because we knew he was, legitimately debating on the fence, hadn't made a decision. There hadn't really been any strong indications one way or another. So you knew it was a possibility. And yet, when it happens, there is still that element of surprise of just like, wow, it's actually over. Like you said, 20 years, 19 seasons. A guy who obviously is still a really good player, just won his 6th Selke trophy. Was the first line center on the greatest regular season team in NHL history. So there's still game left. He can still do it. But obviously, as he said in his very long statement, which, we won't read the whole thing here, but encourage people to read it. Either, Bruins posted it. I have it in the article on weei.com. He just felt like it was time. He said he knew it was time. He did just have his 4th child. It's, he's been doing it a long time. And, I do think he took his time and made sure it was right. I'm sure now that he has officially retired, it makes me think that he was probably leaning that way right at the end of the season. If not even before then, at some point, leaning towards last year being his last season. But I'm sure he wanted to make sure that it really was right. Give it the time to settle in and all that. And obviously he has. We're now almost 3 months out from when their season ended. And it clearly has sunk in for him. And and he now makes it official. But yeah, it is just crazy to think about. There's just, just going on my own timeline. It's I've been covering him in one capacity or another for over a decade. And yet there was almost a full decade of his career even before that, going back to my freshman year of high school in 03-04. That's just crazy to think about. It's that's, over half my life, well over half my life that Bergeron has been on the Bruins. So, yeah, just really crazy to reflect on.
Yeah, no, it is. And this morning, seeing the news initially, I was kind of surprised. I know we knew, and Scott and I, from, breakup day on, we're both kind of 50-50 on whether or not we thought he was going to come back. And Brian, you last week made me really optimistic because, and the main reason was just that it would have made his career ending being the centennial season made a lot of sense to me. Wanting to be the captain for the centennial season. But if you read his statement, he said he's listening to his body, that it's time. And so that tells you that health-wise, he said he wanted to go out on his own terms. So maybe he was worried about this upcoming season, suffering some setbacks. Health-wise, wasn't sure if he was going to be able to make it and go out on a high note. You could argue, with the way the Bruins season ended this year, postseason ended, it wasn't really a high note. Regular season was a high note, postseason not so much. But I did think he would come back. I was leaning towards thinking he would come back for the reason of wanting to captain the Centennial team. But then, family and health seemed to be pretty much the two biggest factors in him deciding to. hang him up. And I mean, obviously, really well written statement from him. He's a very thoughtful person when you go through. He actually did talk about the media. He said, I thought that my coverage has been really fair from the time I got into Boston, which is true. I think people, well, besides a few names that I won't name, have been pretty fair to Bergeron and understood like his character, accurately portrayed it. So he's been such a huge figure in Boston sports. And I went back this morning and I woke up, instead of like watching TV, I opened up YouTube and was watching Bergeron like highlights. Obviously the overtime game winner against Toronto was on all of the highlight compilations of Bergeron's best career moments. His 2 goals in the Stanley Cup final against Vancouver, including the very first goal in that game, which kind of put the Bruins in the driver's seat. And some of his fights too, actually, like before people realized he was a southpaw, and just I forget who that first fight was against, but he just
Georges.
Yeah, Georges, and he just like totally surprised him with a couple of lefts, and I think that was probably the only fight he won. He lost badly to Malkin and Wheeler and other fights, but I spent the morning just going through some of those clips from, some of them, like the quality is funny to even look at, because I remember watching them live, but then like looking at it now, it's like the quality looks so bad that it looks like it's from so long ago. And then I'm like, oh shit, it is from so long ago.
Yeah, I know. It really is amazing what he's done in Boston for the game of hockey. And I definitely want to give each of us an opportunity to kind of just talk about, his body of work. But I guess it does make the most sense to just start off with what you guys did, which is just the initial reaction to it. And yeah, I mean, I definitely, Scott, to your point, you say it's surprising, and yet it's not surprising. Like, cognitively, I know he's been playing since I was having 2 snacks and 2 recesses back in 2003. It's been a long time. I get it. But at the same
How'd
time,
you sneak a second recess?
I don't know.
How'd you manage that?
Well, we would have recess after snack and then recess after lunch.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, so yeah, it's been a long time, a long time. But at the same token, yes, he did just win a Selke, and he is still a first line caliber player. So yes, he's very much doing what most professional athletes probably don't do, and he's quitting while or not quitting, that's the wrong term. He's retiring while he still has some left in the tank. I was surprised because I did believe that, Bridgette, you mentioned it. Yes, like I felt as though that it would have been a nice ribbon on his career to just kind of have his 20th season coincide with the team's 100th season. And regardless of what happens next year, whether they make the playoffs, win the cup, miss the playoffs, whatever, like he was just going to do that one last year. He was going to take part in all the different heritage nights and all the ceremonial puck drops with different Bruins throughout the franchise's history and whatnot. And yes, buy the Bruins management another year to try to find a first line center after him. But to your point, Bridgette, that didn't happen. And yes, reading his memo, yeah, his body doesn't feel up to it anymore. And as rational as it seems to be, like, just play the 20th year in their 100th year and go out, like, that's all well and good. But when your body's telling you something, you can't argue that. And I remember last year, I'm sorry, at the end of this year, we were kind of talking about speculating if he would come back. And one of the things I did say about him not coming back would be, it just kind of felt like after playing the entire season, just about this year, the regular season, his body held up the entire time. The team goes on the run that they did. And then right before the playoffs, he ends up getting hurt. I just kind of felt like that just must have seemed discouraging for him to want to come back again. Like, what if you come back again and something happens? And it just all amounts to maybe it not being worth it. And the body just, you have to listen to it. So there were a lot of reasons why I was optimistic he would come back for one final year. But when your body tells you that it's time to hang him up, and along with certain family aspects, then there's no arguing that. And it's unfortunate for the Bruins because one more year would have probably done the franchise a little bit of extra time to find a replacement. But now Judgment Day is here for Bruins management. Krejci's probably done, and Bergeron's done. So we'll see what they roll out next year. But I was definitely a little surprised just because of the reasons I mentioned. But I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I also am surprised that Krejci wasn't the first one to, like, Krejci. We still haven't gotten the Krejci decision, which he was the one that we kind of were thinking we might know earlier because he said he would have his decision in a few weeks, and then we're still waiting. I mean, Krejci could still be back. We don't know.
Well, Krejci's always been the more indecisive of the two. Which, he knows and said he wasn't going to be that this time, but still was. But based on like the most recent comments we heard from Krejci, it sounds like his decision is retire or go play in Czechia again. The comments he made to a Czech newspaper.
That's not what I got from when we talked to him on breakup day.
No, well, I'm talking since then. I'm talking like just a few weeks ago when he talked to the Czech newspaper and said, if he was going to come back, it was going to be with the goal of playing in the World Championships in Prague next spring, which means not playing in the NHL because the NHL playoffs overlap with that. So,
but when he talked to us, he said he would either play for the Bruins or retire. And right.
And then to my point of indecisiveness, he has since changed his mind, and now it sounds like it's retire or play back home again. So,
retire or retire is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So either way, it seems very unlikely that he's back with the Bruins. So, So, it leaves you with Pavel Zacha and Charlie Coyle as of now as your top two centers. And, we will get into, are there other options? Can they still do something? What does the team look like if that is what they have at center? I do think it's important to know, like, for Bergeron, as much as I'm sure he cares about what comes next and helping the organization and all that, it also can't be the deciding fact. You know what I mean? Like, he can't make his decision about whether to come back or not. He can't base that on where the organization is or the team is or whether they have a center lined up. Like, he has to do what's best for himself. And if he, has taken all this time, talked things through, thought about it, weighed all his options, and decided, no, it's time for me. And, I'm sure he looks at it and goes, boy, the team really could use another center. Like, they could really use me next season. I'm sure he knows that. But ultimately, if it's time for you, if you know that what's best for you is to retire and not put your body through another season, not put your family through it with a newborn, like, if you know that, then you retire. You take care of yourself, and that's someone else's job to figure out what the center situation is going to be. That's not. Yeah, Bergeron cares about that and has done his part to help the team out in numerous ways over the years, including taking a very team-friendly deal last year. But it's not his job to find his own replacements. So, I'm sure it was in his mind. I'm sure he thought about it, but what goes into his decision are things that are bigger and more important than that.
I'd be interested, Scott, because tomorrow, so Wednesday, I think it's at 11:30, Bergeron has media availability, and Scotty's going to head down there and talk to him, I assume. But
I will be there.
But I would go, but I might have time to still go, but I have Red Sox tomorrow. But so I'd be interested to know, and I'm sure someone is going to ask him, but I mean, maybe we'll even do a reaction podcast on some of the stuff he says, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot there, about how much that his back injury that he suffered at the end of the regular season and struggled with through the playoffs and missed time with in the playoffs, how he feels about, like, is that healed? How much did that factor in? How, is the recovery been an issue for that? And how much that factored into his decision to listen to his body, so to speak, and decide to not play this year.
Yeah, and on the health front, it hasn't been confirmed anywhere, and I haven't confirmed it, but it is worth noting that Rich Keefe reported, this is probably a week or two ago, that Bergeron had hip surgery. No idea the severity of it. There's all different levels of hip surgery. But as much as people like to maybe mock Keefe with like the Pastrnak thing, Keefe was also the first one this morning to tweet out that he was retiring. He tweeted that about an hour and a half before the announcement came out. So,
and Keefe was right about the Pastrnak thing, by the way. He was
told, on the
that
numbers,
is what he was told. Like, I still believe that Keefe had that story right, and that the Bruins, or not the Bruins, but somewhere in the negotiations, things changed between the time Keefe had it and they, changed their minds about it. But I still think Keefe knew what was in the loop on that too.
Yeah, it's clear that he has a pretty good source, even if it's been slightly off or not quite at the timing right on things. But yeah, obviously he knows someone and he's getting pretty solid information. So I'm assuming what he tweeted about the hip came from that person or, through that person somehow. So, I wonder if that's part of it, or if we just don't know. We don't know if that was serious or not. Don Sweeney was asked on free agency day if he had any update on Bergeron's health. And he, kind of sidestepped it, but said as far as we know, everything's good there. So he at least wasn't letting on if there was any sort of major health concern.
So I feel like, we might want to allot some time towards the end, maybe, to kind of go over Bergeron's body of work. I think it might just make more sense to kind of go, where do they go from here? It just feels more natural. So, Christ, yeah. Scott, you said it. Zacha, coil up the middle as it is right now, and your third center is Morgan Geekie.
Or Frederick, yeah. One at center, one on the wing.
Your top line, as it would be right now, would be something along the lines of Coyle, DeBrusk and Marchand, or Zacha, DeBrusk and Marchand, or you have Van Riemsdyk and Pastrnak. We talked about it last week. You don't have Bergeron. You now have two significant holes in your top six, and the forward core is, you have an elite 60-goal scorer. You have a top 5 left wing in the league in Brad Marchand still, I would argue. But it's tough. It's tough to put a contender together when you're missing some key pieces like that. So if you're the Jacobs, are you okay with this going into your centennial season? There is no buzz right now for this Bruins team going into the centennial season other than certain aspects of a centennial season. Sure, Lucic will come back and get a good pop from the crowd this first couple of shifts, but the dust is going to settle pretty quickly, and it's tough to sell a team with a borderline top 2 center and Zacha as your number 1 center, and it's just tough. So, are there deals to be made out there, or are they just? And we've asked this question before, but now that we know Bergeron's officially done, where do they go from here between now and training camp? And what do you think? What do you guys think?
Can I start? So I actually also this morning went back and watched the first 20 goals of Bergeron's 2023 season, so this previous season, and I'm just worried about how it's going to affect Jake DeBrusk, because a lot of the goals, Bergeron's goals, were set up by obviously Marchand and DeBrusk, and they worked really well together. And I just feel like when you put, say, Coyle or Zacha as the center with DeBrusk, I just don't know how that looks, right? Because we haven't seen it. And they had that Bergeron, DeBrusk, Marchand line at different points in the season looked really good together. So that's just one thing that popped into my head when I was going back over some of those goals. And also how freaking good that team was this year in the regular season and how fun they were to watch, because rewatching the goals, I was like, and then I'm watching some of them and there's Taylor Hall and it's like, okay, no more Taylor Hall. Krejci's there, Bergeron, like it's going to be completely different than the lineup from last season, maybe the best lineup the team will ever have, to not that. So yeah, it's going to be such a different look. It's going to affect the wingers a lot. So, I mean, we saw career high seasons for DeBrusk, and for other players because they were, playing alongside such good centers. Those numbers are not going to be there this year.
Yeah, it's like you could, load up a top line of Marchand, Zacha, and Pasternak, and I think that would be a really good line, and potentially one of the 5 to 10 best in the NHL. Like Marchand and Pasternak alone lift any line up a lot, but then that leaves you with the second line of Van Riemsdyk, Coyle, DeBrusk, and like if we're just being real about it, like that's a third line, and I think if that's your second line, like we've talked about, can Van Riemsdyk bounce back and maybe get into the mid-20s in goals and, look a little more like a second liner than he did last year, or, ideally he's probably a third line at this point, but can you get guys around him to kind of elevate? Well, I don't think that happens if it's Coyle and DeBrusk on his line. So then, you look at, okay, do you start splitting guys up? Do you go Van Riemsdyk, Zacha, Pasternak? Marchand, Coyle, DeBrusk played together in the playoffs and looked pretty good, while Bergeron was out. So I don't know. But either way, it's like you're a top 2 center short. You're a top 6 wing short. Your third line looks more like a 3.5 line now. Like it's not, say it's, I don't know, Lauko, Geeky, Frederick, or whatever, something like that. It's like, well, that's better than like a fourth line, but I'm not sure that's a really strong third line. Like you hope it becomes that, but yeah, you have a lot of questions up front. Your defense and goaltending still looks really solid, among the best in the NHL, and that'll get you somewhere. That'll help you win a lot of games, probably closer, lower scoring games. But it's like, man, you're asking Pasternak to do again what he did last season because he's going to need to carry at least that heavy of a load. You're asking Marchand to look like prime Brad Marchand again. We know he wasn't quite that last year, and we know, the double hip surgery lingered. He didn't have a real off season, regular off season training. So you hope that he's completely healthy and comes in and has that truly elite level of, someone who's in the 100-point neighborhood still there, because that's what you're going to need. Like to be a good offensive team, those two are going to have outstanding seasons, like MVP candidate type seasons. And that's a lot to put on two guys, especially when one of them, Marchand, is 35 years old. Like you're asking a lot. So you need Zacha to take another step, right? He had a breakout season. You need him to be even better. So, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of hoping.
And you're asking those guys to do it on lines that they don't have, like they haven't already established chemistry with. Like Marchand has been playing with Bergeron for so long. Like you're asking him to now do it without Bergeron, and so you're asking for his best season at the age of 35 and with a different center. And hopefully, I mean, I do think a lot hinges on Zacha and his ability to become Bergeron, kind of, to morph into a Bergeron style player, which he can be. He plays a 200-foot game. He looked good filling in for Bergeron at center in the playoffs, but I feel like so much hinges on his ability to make that transition smoothly, because he's a natural center and was drafted as a center, but he's not been used as a center really for the Bruins too much, besides if you have recency bias, towards the end of the season he was, but most of the season he was on the wing, and most of his career in New Jersey he was on the wing. So it's hoping that he can transition smoothly to that. And I feel like I personally would keep him with Pasternak rather than put him with Marchand. But just because that is those two at least have played together and have more chemistry, because even though Zacha wasn't always playing center with Pastrnak last year, they were together and kind of already have that built in, knowing where each other is on the ice. So that would leave you with Marchand center being Coyle, more than likely.
Yeah, unless they did what Scott suggested and maybe put Zacha with Marchand and Pastrnak, but you're quote unquote loading up a line, even though you're loading up a line with, to your point, Bridgette, a center who hasn't really proven himself as a true center in the league. I mean, but yeah, it's I mean, clearly the other thing too is all of these things would have to go right. Like you said, MVP caliber seasons from Marchand and Pastrnak. Does lightning strike twice for Pastrnak? I mean, yeah, he has the skill set to do it, but when you're literally the only scoring threat now, one of the only legit scoring threats on a team. I mean, teams were focusing on him last year, but they had incredible depth last year. This year coming up, they would be on him like white on rice. And then Bridgette, to your point, it's a great point. Marchand is going to be without Bergeron, who's been his running mate since he broke into the league. So to expect him to have an MVP caliber season at his age without his bread and butter, that's a tall task. And furthermore, last year they had incredible depth. Right now they have okay bottom six depth right now, I suppose. But last year they had high end depth where David Krejci goes down for 10 games. Your number 2 center. That's not ideal. Oh, well, here comes Pavel Zacha. You don't skip a beat, right? Or Taylor Hall goes down, or okay, let's bring in Tyler Bertuzzi. Like, it's just they don't have that luxury this year, so they also have to be incredibly healthy. One thing that comes to my mind is, and this kind of stems into the question, like, do they try to acquire a number 1 center somehow the rest of the summer? I don't know if there's potential trades to probably still be made. I don't know if the Bruins really have the assets, but when's the last time? And the answer to this truly might be never. You'd probably have to look back well before our time, I would say. Well, maybe Jason Allison years. Let me start with the question so you guys aren't wondering what I'm asking. When's the last time the Bruins entered a season without a true number 1 center? I mean, the last 20 years, you've had a combination of Bergeron, Mark Savard, Joe Thornton. Even during years where the Bruins were kind of down, you always had a number 1 center. And then, so that's why I was kind of thinking, all right, maybe like 99, 2000, maybe Jason Allison was their number 1 center. But I think Jason Allison for a cup of coffee was pretty decent in the league. So even he wasn't that much of a drop off as a 1C. And then, you go back down to the Bork Neely era. I mean, you had Oates and Janney, I think. And it's been a long time. It's been a long time since the Bruins have entered a season without a bona fide number 1 center. So that's kind of why I'd be surprised if the Jacobs allowed that to happen going into their 100th season with all eyes on them. But I don't know if there's anything they can do about it.
Yeah, it just off the top of my head, like, it probably would be pre-Oates, I guess, depending on how high you were on Janney at the time. Like, he was just coming out of BC. So it's probably somewhere in that, late 80s, early 90s. Oddly enough, like when they went to 2 cup finals, but there was some turnover there for a few years. So it's like maybe around then. But I'd probably have to look closer at those teams. But yeah, to your point, a long time. Even around Allison, it's like you also had Joe Thornton, establishing himself at that point in his career where he maybe wasn't quite a true number 1 star yet, but like you knew it was coming. He was getting better each year, putting up more points. So, look, maybe Zacha is that guy. Maybe he, last year was a huge step forward from where he'd been previously. Maybe there is another big step still to come. Like, he had 57 points last year. Who's to say he doesn't get to 70 this year? Is he a guy who grows to 80 at some point? Like, Bergeron and Krejci, it's not like they were ever putting up 100 points, but they were consistently anywhere from 65 to 80 that you could just count on. And in Bergeron's case, obviously elite 2-way play. In Krejci's, for the bulk of his career, really good 2-way play. I do think Zacha can at least be a really good 2-way center. I don't know if he has Selke trophies in his future, but
Hey, now that the King's out of the way, it's up for grabs. More candidates have an actual chance now.
But like that jump I mentioned to like Zaka being a 70-point guy, like I don't think that's crazy. I think he could do that. So, maybe I certainly think he can be one of their top 2 centers for years to come. The question's obviously finding the other one because we don't think it's Coyle, who's 31 years old now and a good player, but with all due respect, like he's had one season in his career over 50 points. In general, he's been more in the 40 to 45 range. Maybe if he has Marchand on his wing for an extended stretch, he gets a little higher offensively. But if you're Don Sweeney, like you're certainly at the very least you have to be. And I'm sure he already was, but you have to be poking around every possible avenue to find a number 1 center because even if you're high on Georgi Merkulov and or Matthew Poitras and you hope that those guys grow into that kind of role, you can't assume that. And that's not happening this year anyways, unless one of them just takes like a massive step forward. But most likely that's at least a year or 2 away anyways. So you're looking and, we've mentioned it before, but 2 of the big center names that were rumored to be on the trade block or potentially available were Mark Scheifele in Winnipeg and Elias Lindholm in Calgary. And those guys haven't moved. They're still there. They also haven't signed new contracts. So, their situation's the same. They're both still going into the final year of their contracts and they haven't been traded yet. So maybe you can circle back on that and see if there's something there. But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of offseason roster building around the league is already done. So, I'm sure Winnipeg and Calgary are at this point operating like those guys are back. And if things go south and they have to explore trading them in season, I'm sure they will. But, it probably takes a lot to get one of those guys at this point.
That's what I was just thinking. You're probably losing one of your goalies, and that also makes you like that.
Well, and neither one of those teams wants a goalie. I mean, Calgary might want to upgrade, but they already have, I think, $8 million invested in the position. Yeah. Winnipeg still has Connor Hellebuck, another guy that hasn't been traded. So, something else has to happen if one of them's taking a goalie, and you don't have the picks, prospects, cap space to add one of those guys without trading something off your active roster.
Yeah, and they're already thin. So you wonder whether or not it would actually really hurt your team to make a move for a number 1 center. Say you have to lose a top 4 defenseman, or like you mentioned, both of those teams aren't really looking for a goalie, which probably their most valuable pieces are either Ullmark and Swayman for teams that actually are trying to add a goalie. But I also wonder what the power play looks like without Bergeron or Krejci, and just how effective the power play would be Bergeron for so long has been such a good bumper player on the power play that you just always know that he's going to be right there, and that's the role he's going to play. And now I think Zaka can be a good bumper player. That's another thing he's going to have to really work on and try to perfect if he's going to kind of become another Bergeron, I guess, if that's the role they want him to play, which I assume it would be on the power play.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he looked good in those opportunities last year down the stretch, and dare I say, at times he kind of seemed a little bit more dangerous than Bergeron towards the end of last year in that role, for one reason or another. But I don't. Yeah, I mean, the power play is going to look different. I think you're not losing if Zaka is your replacement for Bergeron 1-for-1, right? You're not losing speed on there. Like, you're gaining speed on the power play. Zaka's a better skater than Bergeron at this point in each of their careers.
But you're losing more face-offs, like to open power plays, and that can kill power plays.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that's for sure. I mean you'd have to win your fair share there. But I mean honestly, I guess my point is I think like I mean, if you're replacing Bergeron with Zacha, let me rephrase. Speed is just about the only place where you're kind of upgrading there. I mean, everything else you check off to Bergeron. I mean, IQ, finishing ability, face-off percentage, but those are all things that, Zacha is going to improve upon, and I think he has a great ceiling. I'm just saying, I mean, Bergeron's a first ballot Hall of Famer, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, there's so much to figure out with this team. I mean, I honestly feel like, guys, that, I mean, for all the reasons you rattled off, Scott, just lack of assets, lack of cap space, lack of dance partners. Uh, I don't know if there's a move out there to be made, even if the Bruins wanted to for a 1C. And if that's the case, like I look at this Bruins team going into the season, and as it stands right now, I mean, they're gonna have to scratch and claw for like 95 points. They're gonna have to scratch and claw and hope that maybe it's a low wild card year where, I mean, I don't. And I guess my point is, if that's the case, like, should the Bruins be exploring other potential players to maybe trade that it's not going to make or break the team because the expectations aren't there this year? I'm not saying the Bruins can't be a competitive team, but here's an example, right? Since there's no cup aspirations based on this roster, and losing Bergeron really hinders that. I mean, if you had Bergeron, it's different, but you don't. Like, are you more willing to trade somebody like a Matt Grzelcyk and just bring in a Mason Lohrei, and maybe he's not right away a 1-for-1 replacement because of Grzelcyk's experience, but you know what? Maybe it just helps get some money off the books and bring in a younger player. It seems like one of those transitional years, does it not, to you guys?
Yeah, certainly. At least to an extent, but I've kind of said this before, and I feel this way pretty strongly now. Like, I'm okay sitting here now, assuming you get deals done with Swayman and Frederick, who are still restricted free agents with the clock ticking towards potential arbitration hearings. But assuming those guys are back, like, I'm okay saying, okay, this is our roster. Go into the year with it as is, see how things go, and if you're better than expected, and you're kind of right in the middle of the playoff picture, and you're the fourth or fifth best team in the conference, then you consider doing something bigger around the trade deadline. Even though, yeah, you don't want to be in the habit of trading away more first round picks or whatever, but if you think you have a chance and it's, hey, number 2 center is what we need, and someone's available, like, you revisit it then. I don't think you need to make that move now. I'm kind of okay with seeing, like, what this team is and what kind of position they put themselves in, because the flip side of that is if things go south and you're kind of out of it and you're clearly not going anywhere and you're more than just 1 or 2 pieces away, well, I think you have pieces that could be pretty valuable come trade deadline that can help you get back some picks, prospects, and turn this into not, a long-term rebuild, but a pretty quick turnaround transition period. Allmark could have a lot of value by the trade deadline. You look on your defense with whether it's Grzelcyk, Forbert, like Shattenkirk on a 1-year deal, those guys could have value. A Van Riemsdyk as a rental somewhere. Like, I think you have pieces that other teams could potentially want come trade deadline if your season's not going the way that you were hoping. So I'm okay, as I sit here and look at the Bruins, I'm okay saying we're going to go into the season with what we have. We really like our defense and goaltending. We'll see what happens up front. And depending on how the first 3 or 4 months go, we'll make a decision about, all right, this team's worth investing in, and we think we can make a move that gives us a shot to contend, or we have a couple pieces that some other teams might like, and we can get back some picks here.
Yeah, hopefully it's not that one. That would mean that the experiment that is this current roster failed without Bergeron. So you'd at least hope that they'd be a playoff team, even if it's just wild card, like we mentioned before. And remember the optimism from last podcast, guys? Where the hell did that go? Remember how we were talking about how the rest of the teams in the division also got worse? and that it wasn't just the Bruins that got worse, and that, there's still a chance for this team to be a playoff team. Like they could still be a playoff team, guys.
That was under one massive assumption, though. I mean,
no, because we talked about what the team would look like without Bergeron too, and that obviously you're not finishing first or second or third without Bergeron, but you could still be a wild card team without Bergeron.
I mean, look, anything is possible. I think mainly, where I was going last week was if they still had Bergeron, their needs going into this year weren't too dissimilar from last year. But now you've lost your number one center. So, Tampa Bay didn't lose Stamkos. Toronto didn't lose Matthews. Florida's not losing Barkov. That's significant. And I don't mind standing pat here. Like as the season starts, I guess what I'm saying is I just feel like I don't need if it takes a couple of lumps this regular season to get better quicker. I'm not even saying it's a bad thing. I'm looking at this roster right now and look, last year, did Florida upset the Bruins? Yes. But did Florida have significant positional needs filled? Number one center, for example? Yeah, they did. Like they had that. You can't ask a team that they're significant personnel short up front to be a contender. I'm not saying they can't have a competitive season, and let's see what happens. I'm just saying, like, what Stanley Cup team has ever not had a number one center?
Oh, I'm not saying they would be a legitimate contender at all. Just that they could be a playoff team.
No, I get that. I guess what I'm just saying is, like, it just, Scott, when you say that, it kind of just sounds like, and you're only saying this because it's not, you didn't ask for this. Like, you're just like, well, this is what they have to deal with. Like, you're accepting their reality. I'm just saying, like, that's like, it's more or less just kind of conceding, like, let's just be mediocre and see what happens. Like, I kind of, if it wasn't for this centennial season, and it's ironic to me that in their 100th season, like, all this is going to start to come to the forefront, and this massive looming void that we all knew was inevitable, which was Bergeron leaving, they're gonna have to face it when the spotlight's on their organization's 100th year. But if it wasn't the centennial season, I'd be sitting here saying, like, sure, try, but like this team's not gonna win a Stanley Cup, and I just don't think being mediocre helps the franchise long term. So if you have to maybe sell off a couple pieces and help these younger kids develop, like bring up Lohrei, bring up Merkelov, bring up Lysell. Like, why at this point, why deny these kids opportunity? Like, let's see what they have. Let's see what this next wave is. Like, who knows? Maybe a year or two from now, like Matthew Poitras is like a number 2 center, and Zacha turns out to be number 1 center. We don't know. I'm just saying, like, I don't want to suppress some kids in the system that I think can maybe just break through, because you're no longer trying to scratch into an NHL full roster. Like, there are holes on this team, and to not allow some younger kids to come in, and if that means trading away a couple of roster players to do so, just do it. Because, like, I don't know. I'm just trying to say, like, if it means letting go of some good NHL players in a year where let's be honest, you're not going to win a Stanley Cup, and that helps you see what you have coming up, then maybe it's time to do that. But I hear what you're saying, Scott. Like, maybe see what happens. I just,
I also think that plan, though, at this point requires waiting, because if I'm not trying to do everything possible to, free up cap space and make sure I upgrade my roster, whatever, because we're contending, well, now I'm even less inclined to just dump a player. Like, I might, if I'm thinking about trading Grizzly, I might as well hope he has a good season playing next to McAvoy and build up some value, because I think Sweeney has already explored trading him and obviously didn't find a deal that he liked that made sense. Same thing with the goalies. I think he explored that market, but didn't find anything that makes sense. So I don't know. Hope your goalies have really good seasons again, and there's a playoff team somewhere that's goalie desperate. There usually is, and maybe they have more value, as you come up on the trade deadline, and you can actually get something. Like, so I think even that plan of, well, can we create some spots for some kids. I think that opportunity is there if those guys earn it. But in terms of just like opening up spots, you might as well wait even on that and hope guys build some value for you to trade them in season. Because again, right now, so many teams are just up against the cap that look, there weren't a lot of trades anywhere this offseason. Like there's the Dubois trade and not a whole lot outside of that. A lot of the names that were supposedly available didn't get moved. Teams are just too up against the cap to make it work. So I don't really think you're getting anything close to fair value for anyone on your roster right now. So you might as well hang on to them, ride it out, hope they help their value during the season. And if you're not in it and you don't have a chance, then you capitalize then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a very different season than last season. Very, very different. So not gonna break their record for most points in a season this year. But I don't know where you guys want to go from here. We've been talking about the I don't know if really ceiling
plan.
Yeah. Did you want to switch to talking about some of the, the Bergeron moments, or do you have any other thoughts on?
Yeah, I'm good to do that. I mean, the only final thought I had is we were just the last like half hour we've been having this discussion about kind of moving forward. Multiple times the thought has popped into my mind of just like pretend that this Bruins team going into next year had Taylor Hall and Tyler Bertuzzi and Dimitri Roloff and Patrice Bergeron, and like just like how in God's green earth did the Bruins do that? How did they choke that series away to the Florida Panthers? I mean that, and I'm not trust me.
We're back to this.
I'm not trying to relive it, but it's just Bergeron retiring after that loss last year and how much talent that team had. That's just really, really unacceptable. How you had a 3-1 series lead and you had and that roster because we're talking about trying to piece together a respectable roster for next year, and it's like you think back to what their roster was 3 months ago, and it's like how does that happen? But
talking about him really going out on top would have been going out on top with that roster, doing what they should have done, going to the Stanley Cup, and that's how he would have scripted it.
Or even a second round. Or
even,
a third
yeah.
round. Like, come
but,
on.
That's what going out on top needs usually. So.
And I mean, we all knew that like that season was as all in gets with everything they did before the trade deadline and what they traded away in draft capital for rentals, which, we could sit there and say, hey, maybe they re-signed Bertuzzi or Orlov. But realistically, we knew there was a decent chance those guys were true rentals. But, that team was worth doing it for. Again, we've covered this. Like, I wouldn't have any regrets if I'm Don Sweeney. I think you did what you thought you had to do for a team that gave you as good a chance to win a cup as any team we've seen. But yeah, then, I keep thinking about what David Pastrnak said right after the season when he said, like, it hurts now and it's probably going to hurt even more in the months to come. Like, paraphrasing him. But it's like, yeah, it's like all those guys knew. They knew there was a good chance that this was the end for Bergeron and Krejci. At the very least, they knew there was going to be a ton of turnover and guys not coming back. And now you see it. Now it's playing out. So, that's the price of going all in, and it's not on management. It's on the players and the coaching, and they're the ones who are gonna have to live with their regrets there.
And they lost to a team with a 40-year-old Eric Stahl, a 37-year-old Mark Stahl, Radko Gudas, Nick Cousins. I mean Ryan White from like Walpole, wherever he's from, Sam Bennett. These are the guys who beat you. Now I'm not. Obviously, I'm omitting Matthew Tkachuk. He was the biggest reason, and Brandon Montour. But like that Panthers team, honestly, there weren't many.
Didn't even get great goaltending against you. Like it wasn't until the next round that Bobrovsky got hot.
You had a couple of clutch goals from Tkachuk and from Montour, and a lot of self-inflicted mistakes by the Bruins. But like I look back at that series, and it's like I look at the Bruins roster, and then A, and then B, I look at how Florida like yeah, they played hard, but like they didn't like I just don't know how it happened because they just didn't overwhelm the Bruins with anything. I mean, yeah, the forecheck was good here and there, but it's like really, that's the group of players you lost to. But in any event, also the Bruins just had a video on Twitter of all the players kind of wishing Bergeron well and thanking him, and it appears that it was done in May during breakup day because there's some detectives online saying that they're all wearing the same outfits as breakup day. So maybe Bergeron
Can
has
you
known
hear
for
the
a
fire
while.
alarm going off?
Yeah, that'd be a telltale sign. So maybe Bergeron's known for a while, but I guess it doesn't really matter at this point. The market's been what it was.
Or my thought is that they asked people to do it while they were all together,
just in case.
And yeah,
that's fair.
that'd
Yeah,
be my thought.
That's fair. So anyway, not to jump back to last April, but yeah. So Bridget, absolutely. I mean, I'll just go first quickly. I mean, Bergeron, without a doubt. I mean, in my mind, he's a top three. You know, for sure, a top five Bruin of all time, and phenomenal, like just incredible player on and off the ice, person, role model, like 200-foot game. Never took a shift off, and he's going to be sorely missed. I mean, so many great memories are because of him, and I mean, huge reason why they won the Cup in 11, which is, for Bruins fans from whatever, like our age, younger, a little bit younger, to people in their 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, that's only so many of those people have had the chance to watch. So he's an all-time Bruin for sure, and one of the best two-way players to ever play the game. And I mean, 2013 Game 7, phenomenal. 2011 Game 7, just so many career highlights for that guy. So it's been truly an honor to watch him literally almost my entire life, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, third all time in Bruins history in games played, third in goals, third in points. Yeah, I tweeted this earlier today, but obviously that 2013 Game 7 winner, like that's his most iconic goal in part because of Dave Gaucher's incredible call of that. Mm-hmm. But to me, like the one like I always come back to is the second goal in Game 7 of the 2011 final, a shorthanded goal that's just pure hustle play. He gets, draws a penalty on the play, but basically just goes sliding into Luongo and knocks it home to make it 3-0. And at that point, basically seal the Cup. Like I know, Bruins fans didn't want to celebrate too early, right? Because everyone also remembered the collapse the year before against Philly, 2010, where they had a 3-0 lead in Game 7 and choked it away. But you kind of knew, like that just felt different. That Vancouver, like that arena went totally silent after that, because it's like that they have a power play. We knew that Canucks team obviously had a loaded power play. You're thinking, hey, if they score, gets to 2-1, that arena would be going crazy. And it's just, actually Gregory Campbell who wins the faceoff because Bergeron got kicked out of the dot. Seidenberg goes off the glass, kind of lucky bounce, and Bergeron just takes off. That one, it feels the most fitting to me to kind of sum up his career because was shorthanded. It's just hustle. It's not pretty, but it's incredibly clutch and seals that cup. I also think about just how lucky we are that we got this long of a career from him, this great of a career, because I also remember his concussion problems that for a time looked like they legitimately had a chance of ending his career. The hit from behind from Randy Jones in 2007, he misses the rest of that season, continues to have some concussion issues, even up to that 2011 run where he has the concussion scare late in the second round, misses a couple of games of the Eastern Conference Finals. Every time there was a hit, every time there was a chance he had a concussion, you worried. And then he got over it, and you just I feel like we just haven't thought about it for a decade plus. He amazingly just stopped, having issue. Maybe he got smart enough, how to avoid it, whatever. Maybe it's just luck. I don't know, but I do think back to how scary that was for a while with all the time he missed, and the team had to sent him away on a vacation just to get away from everything. And we know what that can do. We saw it end Mark Savard's career. So, it's weird to say get lucky given how bad they were for him and how much time he missed, but was able to recover and all his best years came after that, which is just amazing.
Yeah, and with concussions, I think it is a lot of luck, right? So, and maybe some rule changes helped along the way because things started changing. Penalties got called differently, targeting the head. The league was trying to really enforce getting some of those really bad hits out of the game after that. So, probably luck more than anything for that. But he ended up having a very long career after that concussion, like you mentioned. So, yeah, you're right about that. And it does feel like something that we kind of forgot even, about because it was so long ago.
And you mentioned rule changes. Like he's part of the reason the rules did change too, because he was very open about what he went through and was kind of at that time like one of the only players really speaking up and opening up about like how it affected him. And I think once more players started doing that, like that sort of helped change the culture to where it wasn't like, oh, well, get your head up, tough it out type thing. And when it was more like, hey, like these are actually doing real damage. And like people are talking about this now. And I think that mattered.
Yeah. In terms of like moments from his career though, that I remember and that I will think about when I think about Bergeron, for sure, the Toronto overtime goal. That's just because that was such like a high, like an instant high that every Bruins fan got when they watched that goal. And like the whole New England was talking about that for a long time. We still are. But to talk about how important he was in Game 7 for the Stanley Cup, like I mentioned earlier, he scored the first goal of that game too. So he had 2 goals in the Stanley Cup final. Like when you needed him to be clutch, he was clutch that year. He sealed it off. And like you mentioned, I was watching that highlight from his second goal that made it 3-0. The look in Luongo's eyes was like, oh no, like things were falling apart after that point. Like things were falling apart for you to give up a third goal shorthanded right when you really needed to score on that power play. So I guess that is kind of an epitome of his career. But you want to know what else is too? That one goal that he saved with an empty net. Do you remember this? When he skated the length of the ice and stopped the puck on the goal line and pulled it out. And they had to like review it and make sure it didn't go in, but he just hustled his way all the way back to save it from going in the net.
Yeah, it is wild to think about. You guys bring up such a true point about the concussions and how we just kind of forgot about it, because the first concussion was in October of 2007. The Randy Jones hit from behind, like you said, cost him the season. The second concussion was the following season. He tried to hit Dennis Seidenberg, who at the time was playing for the Hurricanes at like center ice. He tried to hit Seidenberg, and Seidenberg, as we all know from his time in Boston, just was a brick wall. And then the Claude Giroux concussion in the 2011 playoffs, and all those happened. That's 3 concussions in 4 years that we knew of, right? And another thing I think about is it's crazy because
Oh, by the way, and sorry, Brian, but to talk about the concussion thing, like in more recent times, when Bergeron was hurt after that when he left that Montreal game, we actually did wonder if it was a concussion, because they said it was an injury that he already had and it was re-aggravated. And so like people were thinking, okay, well, it was an injury that he's already dealt with. And we didn't necessarily see it happen in real time. Maybe it was like a bump that we didn't notice, like shook him up, and maybe it was a concussion. So then when we found out it was the back, that's better news than if it had been a concussion.
Yeah, there's also there was that awkward hit from Sidney Crosby. That was 2 seasons ago, right? That was like, and I think, what did that end up being? Like he needed stitches or something. Instead, it was like a cut because like his helmet had gotten jammed in to his head or something like that. It's so, but like at the time, it like looked like it was a hit to the head, and you were like, oh man, is that what that is?
And Radek Foska for Dallas got him a couple years back too in Dallas, and people got. I mean, at this point, actually, now that I think about it, that was probably like 5 years ago, which is crazy. But because Torrey Krug was on the team, and I think it was pre-COVID. But back to real quick though, so like when you look back at his career, right? You had 03, 04, 05, 06, 06, 07. So that's 3 seasons. The following season was lost because he got that concussion like a week into the season. So that season's done. So his 4th NHL season was 08, 09, and then 9, 10. So he won a Stanley. Now that we look back and we know it was 19 seasons, he won the Stanley Cup in his 6th NHL season. That's pretty. It was technically his 7th, but he missed the entire year, and then there was a lockout year in 04 or 05. So he had been in the league for more years than he had seasons. But it's kind of weird to think about how it was only his 6th NHL season on the ice when he won the Stanley Cup after 19 seasons. Looking back now, he won that pretty early in his career, all things considered, right around the 1/3 mark. So I think along with all the admiration and accolades people will rain down on Patrice Bergeron, the only thing people will say about Bergeron in this Bruins era, as it's now, I mean, he really is kind of the end of an era here, right? I mean, Bergeron goes, Krejci goes. I mean, you're left with Marchand at this point. The knock on the Bruins is they may have left a couple short. And by couple, I mean Stanley Cups, and Bergeron included. And when you think about how he won that Stanley Cup in his 6th season, you definitely – and they were set up for so long after that. But that's the only thing. But again, that's a team success and a team failure type thing, but not an individual. But yeah, it's just wild. What a career, what a run, and lucky is definitely the term for Boston sports fans. I mean, for him to play his entire career as a Bruin is very uncommon for one player to do it for that long with one team, and I think he should be held in, honestly, like Tom Brady is Tom Brady. What he did here is remarkable, and a couple, David Ortiz and a couple of others in their sports have done some miraculous things. Bergeron didn't get as many rings as some of these guys, but I mean, that aside, he should be held in the highest regard. And I don't know if you guys does Bergeron crack your top 3 Bruins of all time or top 5? Have you even thought about where he is on that list? I mean, obviously it starts and ends with Bobby Orr, but after that, I mean, you got Ray Bourque and Bergeron and a couple of others that really are kind of vying for those top 5 spots.
Well, I know Scott's thought about it because Scott's putting together the Centennial team, so Scott knows where he would put Bergeron, I assume.
Yeah, I'm technically not allowed to like reveal my rankings until they go public, but yeah, like you're obviously in the ballpark. I would say, I think like Orr and Bourque are pretty obvious at the top, and then like you could have Bergeron anywhere 3 through, I don't know, 6, 7. Like he's obviously way up there. So without giving away like exactly where I have him, I think you're pretty safe saying he's at least in contention for the top 5 and potentially even higher than that. Like I think you absolutely can make the case for him being 3rd. You throw Esposito, Busick, Eddie Shore, Neely, Milt Schmidt. Like there's a lot of guys who have great cases to be that high on the list, but he's absolutely right there with any of them. Like, did win a cup, had the longevity, has the point totals in franchise history at or, really high up on like just about every list. So, and all the Selkies, like that's having 2 more of those than anyone else in history. I know it's not, an MVP award, and he never finished top 5 in MVP voting, but winning 6 Selkies is incredible. And this, I think it's absolutely fair. Like, I guess we don't know exactly how great defensively players way back in like the 30s and 40s were, especially forwards. But in modern times, like you can absolutely say with good amount of confidence that he was the best defensive forward ever, or at least expansion era, or whatever parameters you want to put on it. But Yeah, so he's gonna land very high on my list, and I assume on whatever final list that we end up putting out as a group when the Centennial team gets announced.
What happens when you guys disagree on where especially the top 5? I feel like that's going to be tough to agree, but there's about 15 or 20 of you putting it together.
Yeah, well, I think my understanding of how it kind of works is I think the list is just going to be like we all submit our list, and then I think it's just going to be like a calculated combination that spits out like the ranking. But then what we get together and discuss is like we're actually building like a 20-man Centennial team of 12 forwards, 6 defensemen, 2 goalies. So I think that's what we all will be spending a day talking through.
You and Connor Ryan and Matt Porter, and you're gonna have to fight over who's getting.
Yeah, Matt Porter might be zooming in from parts unknown wherever he happens to be on his trip around the world at that point.
So Scott, I have a question for you. And I don't want you to have to reveal your secrets, but one thing I find interesting is for this exercise, so many of the greats that will be high on this list, and anywhere on this list really, but specifically high on this list, unfortunately, you and some others were born after their time, and highlights from a lot of these players' times aren't readily available. So, for players you didn't have the luxury of watching throughout your life, where you have to, is it just more or less reflecting on just like stats and just rhetoric and because I would love, hey, if anybody from Nesson's listening, instead of 50 episodes of Charlie Moore Outdoors from 10 years ago, can we get some archived Bruins games from the 70s and 80s just constantly on, and Red Sox and all the sports? Can we get some archived games from the New England Sports Network onto their channel? That'd be great.
I remember when I don't remember if it was Nesson or maybe even UPN back in the day when they used to play more of them. And I would just, it's fascinating just to watch because it's you want to see those old players, but also it just looks like a different sport. It's
awesome.
It does.
Yeah. It's
back in the I want to say maybe around 2000 to 2005, around then, Nesson used to have this show called Fan Attic. And you would tune in, and I still can think of the theme song. It was and then they had a narrator, and he would they were chronologize game by game highlights of the 1970 season, and it was just really cool, and other seasons in that era. And anyway, so to my question though, Scott, it must be tough to kind of do your due diligence with only so much readily available.
Yeah, I mean it's stats, it's looking at things how important they were on teams. Did they win a cup? Were they one of the best players on a team that won a cup? Were they one of the best players on teams that made deep playoff runs? How do they compare to the rest of the league? Where do they finish in Hart Trophy voting or Norris voting, or what do they win for awards? Things like that. And then, trying to read up on, because what they tell us is the definition is the most legendary players. So they leave that open to us. So it's okay, also, were they kind of bigger than the game? Were they regarded as a superstar? Because then I guess that would make them a little more legendary than maybe someone who was a good player on a good team, but might have been a little more under the radar. So I tried to take kind of all that into account. It is hard to compare across errors because it's I mentioned Bergeron not finishing top 5 in Hart Trophy voting. And then it's someone like Eddie Shore won 4 Hart Trophies. But he was also playing in a smaller league in a completely different era where the game looked completely different. And it's how do you balance something like that? Eddie Shore's 4 Hart Trophies in the 30s aren't the same as a Hart Trophy today, or even.
Yeah, he didn't have to try to beat out Connor McDavid for one. So
yeah, so stuff like that's tough. But I do try to look at, how do you compare within your era? Basically, were you one of the best in your era? Did you just play for a long time? All that, did you help them win a cup or multiple cups? So You know, I try to incorporate a little bit of everything, and then at a certain point, it kind of just gets down to like gut feel. Like I don't have like a formula where it's like spitting out numbers for each guy, and it's like,
But
okay, well, I'm just gonna rank them all by these
advanced
points.
stats.
What?
You love your advanced stats.
So what's like the closest you can probably get with advanced stats for something like this is Hockey Reference does have point shares, both by season and for careers. So like you can look at that and it can be something of a guideline, but like it's an imperfect stat and it's calculated differently because like today you have more data for it than you would have in the 1920s. So, there's also like people also played fewer games back then.
Right.
If you go way back to the 20s, they were like 20 game seasons and then they went up to like 40 or 48 game seasons. So it's like you can't even just go on counting stats either.
What are the advanced stats for the 20s? How many packs of Marlboros they smoked between
Right.
periods?
Yeah.
I mean,
how many guys you hit in the head with your stick and force them to be stretchered off?
I'm curious. When does this come out next year?
So our lists are due in August, and then we all get together in September, and I think everything gets announced publicly in October.
Oh, I wonder
right before the season.
I don't know if it's before or might be like during early season at some point.
I mean, I know we talked about like how next season it's unclear, right? But there are still some Bruins on the current roster that are definitely going to be high on these lists. I mean, David Pastrnak is 11th in the franchise's all-time scoring leaders, and he's 27 years old. He's halfway through his career. So and then Marchand is a top 10 scorer, and Milan Lucic's coming back. I'm sure you talk about larger-than-life personalities. I mean, maybe Lucic will find himself somewhere on that list. I think he rightfully should be if we're talking 100 players. So, anyway, that'll be fun. You guys have is Brad Marchand, before we sign off, is he the next captain? They're going to be captainless in their 100th season, or is he going to pass the torch to somebody? You think?
I think it should and will be Marchand. I think he probably gets a C until he retires or he's ready to pass it on to someone. But that makes a lot of sense to me rather than like bypassing him and going to McAvoy or Pastrnak, which I guess like I kind of understand from the standpoint of, hey, if you want to like really kind of turn the page to the next era and get it on, one of those long-term pillars of your next core. But I mean, Marchand's the leader of this team right now. Like he's one who stepped up when Bergeron was out in the playoffs. He was clearly Bergeron's deputy for the last several years. So it's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I think it has to be Marchand. And we think about the personalities of McAvoy and Pastrnak as well. Pastrnak, he's kind of a go with the flow kind of person, it seems. And Marchand has really stepped up in terms of leading. We saw it in the playoffs. I mean, it kind of sounds silly to probably non-Bruins fans because they think of Marchand as somebody who licks people and, has not been the most mature player in the past, but he's definitely matured. And we've seen it in particular this past season. He has really shown that he has those leadership skills, and I feel like it would be wrong to bypass him. I don't care if you're really wanting to turn the page. I think that would be disrespectful to the role Marchand has played here for almost as long as Bergeron. So it would be wrong to go right by him, and I think that people look to him for leadership. So why not just give him the C?
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised if it did go to one of the younger two, in Pastrnak or McAvoy. I don't think it would go to them without going through Marchand first. And the only way that gets tricky is if the Bruins end up floundering for a year or two and they decide to maybe sell high on him or something like that while he has a C. That could be tough. But yeah, I mean, I also think he would. I also think that he is gonna hold the weight of the captainship in the centennial season and all that entails, media, ceremonial things and all that stuff. So I think, and yeah, I mean, and he's the last. Well, Lucic is back, but he's the last remaining champion from that season, right? So
it's a Lucci. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just
yeah.
kidding.
So anyway, all right, guys. I think we've done a sufficient update for our listeners on the Bergeron news. Any final thoughts, takeaways?
Just wondering when the Krejci news comes.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird that that's still lingering, but I don't know. I would be very surprised if we find out he's coming back. Just doesn't seem like that's going to happen.
Any what's the timeline again for Frederick and Swayman?
Within the next week, basically. I think Swayman's hearing's July 30th and Frederick August 1st. So
okay,
basically under a week to get a deal in before you go to arbitration, which is no one wants to go to arbitration because especially if you're the team, like you have to basically make the case for why the player isn't worth as much as they think they are.
Yeah.
And that's done in front of the player. So it's like
ugly.
That it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think I remember I can remember a few like ugly arbitration hearings that were, they feel like maybe Zach Parise was one like a while ago where it went and then it's just insulting.
The Bruins would have a tough time telling Swayman why he isn't worth something, though. I mean,
I know. And Frederick having his best year in his career.
With Frederick, though, they can talk about how quietly Frederick's been on the team for like 5 years now, so they could talk about how he's just breaking through now, and he was on a line with Taylor Hall and whatever. But with Swayman, it's like he's just been steady since he debuted. The only thing that they can say to him is that he carried the workload with Ullmark, but that was not his decision. So
yeah, and talk about when you talk about Swayman, maybe a guy that will be on the next Centennial team if he sticks around in Boston and plays to the potential we think he has.
Well, and also like if from the Bruins perspective, if you get this worked out before, it also potentially allows you to fit them into what you have left of cap space and not have to free up any more. Right now, the Bruins have $5.4 million, so however you want to split that up in your head, say it's 3.2 to Swayman, 2.2 to Frederick, like something like that. You can be talking to both sides and like finagle that into what you have left. If you go to arbitration and lose both and they come in higher, like you don't get to negotiate after that. Either you accept that and sign them for it, or you let them go and they're a free agent. And it's like, you don't want to have Swayman come in at 4 and Frederick at like 2.5, and now it's like, crap, we're $1 million over if we sign them. Like that's you want to get it done before. And I guess I still think they will, but obviously they are now cutting it a little bit close with 5-6 days to go.
All right, Bridgette and Scott, thanks for being flexible today. I mean, all of us kind of just were like, all right, we got to hop on and do this episode now because this doesn't get much more newsworthy than this. I mean, we're talking about an all-time player and professional. So congratulations to Patrice Bergeron. For making all of our lives just so much more enjoyable watching the Bruins the last however long you've been watching them. And we'll see what happens with the team going forward. They got the work cut out for them. And we don't, we only have about 2 months? Just about 2 months until opening night, maybe a little bit more. So we'll see if the Bruins enter the regular season as is, or if changes are on the horizon. But either way, we'll be covering it the entire time. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you very soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.